Here's Chrystia Freeland with a very confusing message. Like, is the plan austerity and cuts, or is that the worst thing we can do? Listen, it's very confusing. This is only 6 months ago.
That our economic plan is fiscally responsible. And that really matters because it means we can afford to make the investments Canada needs. Investments in things like a national system of early learning and childcare, investments in things like a national school food program, and create the good jobs that Canadians need. It means the federal government can responsibly invest and borrow at lower costs, as can other orders of government and Canadian business. It also shows that Pierre Poilievre would rather make inflammatory statements and, frankly, mislead Canadians than admit the truth, which is that our government's plan is fiscally responsible. The reality is that what the federal Conservative Party stands for is austerity and cuts. The federal Conservative Party is looking for any excuse to cut investments in Canada and Canadians. Our government knows now is a time we need to invest. We need to invest in housing. We need to invest in making life more affordable with programs like early learning and childcare. We need to invest in economic growth.
Spend, spend, spend.
And we're doing it with a fiscally responsible plan because we know that all Canadians are counting on us, and especially younger Canadians need us to be there for them now.
Prime Minister Mark Carney and his cabinet.
I don't know, Chrystia Freeland. Let's see. It's going to get worse here. Now they're going to have to back up on their words. Let's see what happens. All right, we're going to get into it here. David Cochrane is back. I know he's no fun to watch. It sucks the life out of me too. But let's see. They get the guests. Anyhow, so we've got Wayne Long. He's an MP from New Brunswick, and he is...
Prime Minister Mark Carney and his cabinet is preparing their first budget, expected to be tabled in October. The Prime Minister says Canadians can expect to see an austerity and investment-focused budget. And after asking cabinet ministers to find ambitious savings proposals amounting to 15% cuts or reallocation by 2028-2029, this will be the first look at the government's books since Carney became Liberal leader. And since last year's fall economic update, which projected a $42.2 billion deficit for 2025-2026, Carney has warned that this year's deficit will be larger because since then, Carney has cut.
Because he likes to spend your money and make the interest back. He's a banker.
Income taxes, which is obviously going to be a hit to revenue. He's rolled out economic supports for groups affected by tariffs, and there's probably going to be a need for more to come. He's also pledged a massive increase in defense spending, and all of that is going to add to the deficit. And this all comes at a time when Canada's economy is facing a worsening economic picture and, of course, the ongoing trade war.
What the government is going to do, and what we're in the process for the next budget, is focusing on reducing waste, reducing unnecessary federal spending, reducing the duplication in federal spending, becoming more efficient in federal spending so that we have the room, we have the force to support our businesses so they can invest for the future.
Wayne Long is the Secretary of State for the...
This guy is a funny bird, man. Wayne Long is a weirdo. Let's see where this goes. I haven't watched it yet.
Canada Revenue Agency and financial institutions, and he joins me now. Wayne Long, it's good to see you again. Thanks for coming in.
Great to see you, David, always.
So you've been crisscrossing the country doing pre-budget consultations with people and companies and organizations.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister says this is going to be austerity and investment in this budget. Is that what Canadians want?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I started in Kelowna, went to Calgary, Edmonton, Thunder Bay, Winnipeg, through obviously Ontario, many times to Toronto, Ottawa, then Atlantic Canada. And I think the common themes from coast to coast to coast are that people understand the ground has shifted underneath us. It's not the same world it was even 6 months ago, a year ago. And I think people are seized with the moment. I think people realize that we're at a crossroads as a country. And I mean, obviously we've had a wake-up call from obviously the states that south of us, and I think people want to help. And if I've heard it once, I've heard it 100 times across the country. Help us to help you. We want to be a part of the solution.
Okay, so that's the investment side of what you're talking about as a government. The austerity side, we don't have a lot of clarity on yet, except that the target for starting next year's budget. What are you hearing from Canadians on that? Do they want austerity in any form in this budget?
Well, I think Canadians, again, from coast to coast, understand where we are as a country. And I think that Canadians, again, from coast to coast, realize that, although we did many, many good things as a government over the last, 9 years, that it's time to kind of get our financial house in order. Again, the ground shifted underneath us. It's not the same country it was. So we need to get our fiscal house in order. I think Canadians understand that. And certainly the vibe and the feedback that we're getting in our pre-budget consultations is just exactly that. That they know there's going to be some belt tightening, know there's going to be a review. But let's not prejudge the review. I know people are like, oh, they're going to cut and they're going to cut services and they're going to cut this and that. Let's not prejudge that. Let's go slowly. Let's internalize. I mean, obviously, each minister has been asked to tighten belts to see where there's efficiencies. And like I said before, maybe I said it in the wrong way. My very first interview, actually going into cabinet with respect to corporation. But you know what? Our Prime Minister does want to run this like a business. He wants to make sure that we're accountable to Canadians. We're accountable to those who invest in us. And obviously, Canadians are the shareholders of Canada. We want to make sure that every dollar has justification, is rationalized, and is spent effectively. And I'm convinced we can hit that sweet spot.
Okay, but it's going to be a difficult job. I mean, it got overshadowed for a lot of reasons on Fall Economic Statement Day last December, the resignation of the finance minister that day in particular. $42.2 billion deficit was the projection last December. Since then, there's been an income tax cut, there's been a defense spending commitment, there's been a lot of sectoral and economic supports caused by the trade war, and there's been a worsening economy. We've seen some projections from C.D. Howe, for example, looking at a $90 billion deficit this year, right? So how do you do the things Canadians are asking you to do to give them the certainty they need to make investments when that fiscal hole is growing and enormous as it is and needs to be brought under control?
I mean, I think we were elected, I know we were elected under a mandate of fiscal responsibility, spending taxpayers' dollars wisely. Ground has shifted, like I said, it's not the same world that we were in a year ago. So we need to invest in Canada. We need to create economic growth. We need to invest in Canadians. We need to create jobs, invest in, obviously, defense, energy, different sectors from coast to coast to coast. I think we can hit that spot.
That's a deficit that goes up, not a deficit that goes down, if you have to do those things.
Well, you know what, again, I think strategic investment helps grow the economy, puts people to work, creates more tax revenue. I think there's a sweet spot that we can hit. I'm convinced that, look, it's difficult times. I think Canadians know that. Certainly during the election, I heard that door to door, that people understand the gravity of the situation. But our Prime Minister was elected for a reason. Our Prime Minister is the right Prime Minister at the right time for this country. This is a generational pivot for our country. It's a generational opportunity for our country. I honestly believe, obviously, there's no country that has a lot of risk, but there's no country that has a greater opportunity. If we invest in ourselves, if we invest in defense, if we invest in energy, we can get this right. I'm absolutely convinced of that.
Right, but look, there is a massive exposure, obviously, to the uncertainty from the United States, just given the intertwined nature of the economy. And, throughout the summer, you heard from major institutional investors saying they wanted to be given a reason to invest more at home. But since the course of this year, the tariff situation's kind of gotten worse rather than getting better. The economic situation has gotten a lot worse rather than getting better. How do you give Canadian industry and businesses and investors comfort in such uncomfortable circumstances?
I think that obviously C5 with interprovincial trade, but also national projects can unlock a lot of that. I think regulatory-wise, we need to look at some regulatory limitations that limited investment, that limited growth of businesses. I believe that the country and that industry is ready for us. Like I said to you earlier, I've heard time and time again people, industry sector say to us, help us to help you. In a meeting with the Maple 8, literally there's billions.
Who's the Maple 8?
Ontario Teachers Pension Fund and, investors like that have literally.
Institutional investors.
Right.
Help us help you. Ah, my lord. They're just looking for a carte blanche. Wayne Long is embarrassing.
Billions and billions of dollars, and a lot of that money is not invested in Canada. And what I heard time and time again was, look, we want to invest more in Canada. Help us. Bring down regulations, spur investment, have big projects, big national projects that we can invest in. They don't hanker to invest in the States, but sometimes we have created a culture that really wasn't kind to investment. So I believe we bring down regulations, we look at some tax codes.
They've been in government for 10 years. Oh my goodness, blame it on Harper.
We spur investment in ourselves, and they want to be a part of the solution. I'm convinced that if we do this right, we can be the strongest economy in the G7. The Prime Minister has said that. He obviously has the experience behind him, and I believe, again, it's a generational opportunity for our country, for our government, and we will get this right.
So do you think the projects, which we understand, at least the first wave of them, will be announced later this week, probably when you're in Alberta for your caucus retreat? Yeah. If you have a list you want to share, we'll be happy to have it.
Yeah, I don't have that.
But do you think that unlocks the billions in the Maple Lake? Do you think these become projects for the pension funds and the institutional investors? Will there be enough with the C5 framework and this list of projects to get that capital spent in Canada?
Yeah, I think it's a good start. Yeah. I think that, again, people are looking for a reason to invest. They want to see certainty. They want to see some regulatory hurdles cleared. You talk about maybe an energy network from coast to coast to coast. You talk about, obviously pipelines or what have you, nuclear, what have you. I think there's all kinds of investment that the private sector is willing to do. They just need an opportunity to do it, and they need to feel welcomed.
So where does your climate plan fit into this, Wayne Long? Because we've already seen the carbon tax go. It became so toxic and polluted itself politically, it disappeared. The EV mandate is now paused and being reviewed, and we're told there's this larger climate competitiveness review happening. Yeah. There's a push for tanker bans to go. There's a push for emissions caps to go. There's a push for flexibility on the clean electricity regulations. At each step, it seems like Canada's climate ambitions push away because of the...
Okay, so David Cochrane's asking a fair question here, like a real question. How is Wayne Long going to handle this?
Economic uncertainty. How do you balance it?
Will be embarrassing.
I mean, look, we're Liberals. The Liberal Party is obviously committed to, climate or carbon reduction. I think that's very clear. I think the Prime Minister, in his statements in his past, have been very clear with respect to carbon reduction. Again, this is not the same world we were in 6 months ago. We need to.
It's the same climate we are in. The political climate has changed. The actual climate has gotten worse.
Absolutely, but I stand with our climate record. I think that Minister de Brussen is doing a great job. Minister Guilbeault before her, and I think that we need to balance what's best for the climate with what's best to grow our country and grow industry and spur investment. Again, we're at a critical time for our country. It's a generational time for our country. We need billions of dollars invested in sectors from coast to coast to coast to help our economy grow, to make us resilient, to protect our sovereignty, and to grow our country. We can hit that sweet spot. I know it. Okay. Look, if you want to go down that hole, Pierre Poilievre says, let's cut the industrial carbon tax. Let's cut it all. We don't say that. We believe in the industrial carbon tax.
No, I get that. But for a decade, we heard the climate and the economy can work together. If you don't have a plan for one, you don't have a plan for the other. And now consumer carbon tax is gone, the EV mandate is paused, and everything else is up for review, right? So now the argument seems to be it's difficult for them to work together when trade is being disrupted and climate may be the thing that gets chucked overboard.
Yeah, I understand that. But again, it's a different world. We need to spur investment. We need to spur our economy. We will do that with nation-building projects. I'm convinced we can get it right.
What about the size of the civil service, just as a final point?
Sure.
The public sector unions are deeply alarmed by what they hear about with the 15% reallocation targets, starting in next year's budget. Already, we're seeing a lot of young people being told their contracts aren't being renewed and different things like this. I mean, where does the civil service go? Where does the size of government go under this?
I think it needs to be reviewed. I think I wouldn't prejudge. Again, I've said to people, UTE, PSAC, don't prejudge the process. We want to look at everything. We want to look at, obviously, the public service. We want to look at middle management, upper management. We want to look at every line item. I obviously come from a small business background, and, a lot more zeros, obviously, in the federal government budget. But, it's incumbent on us as elected officials to look at every line item on that expense side and say, okay, where can we get efficiencies? Where can we get rid of duplication? Where can we make things more nimble for Canadians? I, again, believe we're going to get it right.
Okay, a lot of pressure and a lot of balance. Yeah, Wayne Long, Secretary of State for the Canada Revenue Agency and Financial Institutions. Good to see you, sir.
Always good to see you.
All right, well, that's enough of Wayne Long. Let's get into the next piece. I think it's going to be more CBC. Oh, yeah. This before, I'm going to sit in with the power panel.
Okay, we're going to start there with the power panel. Vandana Cotter was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Kate Harrison is a conservative political analyst. And here with me in the flesh in the studio is Brad Levine. He's a former national campaign director for the NDP. And Rob Russo is the Canada correspondent for The Economist. It is good to see you all. We're talking economics, so I'm going to start with the guy from The Economist. Wayne Long talks about finding that sweet spot. What's the sweet spot between investment and austerity when you're in the middle of the trade war and people are looking for help?
You didn't introduce me this time as a former CBC bureau chief.
Just saying, it's a contradiction. You can't do both. Like, it's not some kind of magic show. They're going to say that it is, but you can't cut and invest at the same time. Like, it makes no sense anyways. Let's see what the power panel has to break down.
Reminding people that I used to ask you and others to do stories. One of the things that I used to ask people to do was to come up with a narrative arc, particularly on a complicated story. What is the necklace that we're trying to put pearls on, right?
Right.
I don't know what it is yet with this budget. Is it austerity or is it investment? I'm not sure if the Prime Minister wants a deal with the United States or is turning us away from the United States because things are never going to be the same as they ever were before. I think the government, and I think Mr. Long was starting to get at this, the government needs to tell us that we're going to go through a very, very difficult time, an arduous journey. It's going to be tough in some instances. I think he's beginning to signal that, laying the foundation for that toughness by bringing in the equivalent of an economic statement when it comes to help for industries that are going to be affected during this difficult time. He needs to tell us that and then tell us how he's going to get us to the promised land that he talked about, where we can give ourselves more than anybody can take away.
I don't know about the promised land. Like, I'll take back what we had like 8 years ago, even. Like, that was all right.
But that, I've yet to see that narrative arc.
Yeah, I guess, Vandana, on the narrative arc, I'll break it into a symphony, 3 acts. Friday's announcement was like the scaffolding around the economy to kind of help support it. The budget will be their fiscal plan, and the projects will be the path forward for growth. But how do you do all of that when you're looking at maybe a deficit of $90 billion, V, and deliver the support you need and not absolutely blow the finances of a federal government?
He's already accepted, like, the budget will be a $90 billion deficit. It should be $45 billion, $40 billion, but he's already selling it to Canadians that it's acceptable, that it's going to be $90 billion. Notice that. The CBC does this all the time.
Yeah, I think for the most part, Prime Minister Carney has spent the whole summer making different announcements that are big ticket items. So defense spending, supports for industry, supports for workers affected by industries that are affected by tariffs. So I think those, in terms of big ticket spending items, I don't think there's going to be many surprises in the budget. I think what they mean by austerity, and I'll touch on Rob's point on the story arc in a moment, but when it comes to austerity, I think what they're looking at is where to streamline government. And something I've heard the Prime Minister talk about on the campaign, talking about making government work faster, being more nimble. So I think what you'll see is like grandfathering of some programs that...
Just so we know, this chick used to be Trudeau's staff. So she's very biased, very woke, very liberal. She's fake and phony. Her opinion hardly counts.
May not be of use to Canadians anymore. I think also, like, having gone through the budget process, people come to you a lot with like special projects that I think there won't be a lot of leeway for anymore. So I think things like that will be where you'll find more of the austerity, because those things, as much as they are small things in a bigger picture, they do add up over time, and right now every dollar counts. So I think you'll see a lot of focus on investment, as Prime Minister Carney has talked about, but not a lot of fun spending or things that people are used to, like special projects or ridings here and there.
But know, Kate, it's interesting to see sort of the messaging change a little bit. You know, as Rob was talking about, he's started to use the word rupture, the Prime Minister has. And
okay, rupture, I noted, I said that in one of my previous videos. Rupture is going to be one of the new keywords, the hot words the Liberals use in their dictionary.
What's happening with the United States, and really, you know, doubling down on the fact that 85% of our goods are still able to go in tariff-free, which is, you know, obviously down 15% from where things started with NAFTA. I mean, what does that signal to you about where this is going? Because the conditions have gotten pretty bad, and they look like they're going to get worse before the turnaround could even begin to happen.
I'm not sure there's a more iconic duo than a Liberal government promising or saying or messaging that they are going to deliver austerity and belt tightening, and then delivering a budget that is anything but. And when I look at Friday's most recent announcement, billions of dollars in new spending, and a lot of that probably needed to help a lot of these tariff impacted industries. But if the government is going to keep spending billions of dollars for steel and aluminum and helping workers transition to new employment, then at the very least, I think Canadians are owed an update on where the status of conversations sit when it comes to eliminating the tariffs that are the rationale for all of this spending. In 2023, Chrystia Freeland talked about the need for belt tightening, and all we saw was government spending increase. So if the Prime Minister and the government are sincere and authentic about the message that things need to change, the floor is what we had today in terms of finding cuts and efficiencies within the government. I think a lot of Canadians would expect that, but what's missing is, what does that mean for me? And that was also missing in the Friday announcement. I think the big thing that's really absent from a lot of the conversations happening right now is key measures to address affordability across the board. And that involves the very uncomfortable thing, looking at, you know, legislation that might need to change in order to encourage more investment here, or cuts to some places in order to help offset or provide affordability measures elsewhere. But a lot of this is very much geared towards subsidy for corporations, not a lot for people. And at least from my perspective, the government's doing a very poor job in messaging what those billions and billions of dollars to help course correct the economy are going to mean for everyday affordability. And that's where the politics of this really lie.
So Brad.
All right, we're going to wrap it up right there. Thank you all very much for watching. That's a lot of CBC. It's too much for me to handle. So we're going to just zip over here. I'm Aaron. This is Canadian Looney. We cover Canadian federal politics right here. Like, share, subscribe, all those fun things. We do live shows. We broadcast the question periods live. It's a fun chat room. It's an interesting hour every day during question period. That's it. Thank you all for watching. CBC is a lot to take. Wayne Long is a total hose. Don't let them dupe you, guys. Aaron, Canadian Looney. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you in the next video. Ciao for now. Later, gang.